Grieve.
Whatever policy differences the Prime Minister may have with others, he may agree that he has an absolute duty to observe and uphold the rule of law. And whatever self-justifications he may have advanced today, he may also have to accept that in the matter of proroguing this House, he failed to do that. In those circumstances, would he now like to take the opportunity, rather than condemning the number 2 withdrawal bill as a surrender bill, to assure the House that if the
Order. Let it be said with crystal clarity, including to occupants of the Treasury bench.
Here we go.
Yes, here we go. The right honourable and learned gentleman will be heard. He won't be shouted down by people from his own benches. That sort of behaviour is intolerable, and it is obviously so to most remotely reasonable people. Mr. Dominic Grieve.
Will he therefore take this opportunity to give an assurance to the House that should the terms of the bill apply to him, rather than going to try and die in ditches, he will observe those terms as he is duty-bound to do?
Mr. Speaker, I repeat the confirmation I've made many times that this government observes and will observe the law. But our view, I may say to my right honourable and learned friend, that our view of the particular matter that was before the Supreme Court had the support of the Master of the Rolls and the Lord Chief Justice, who at the risk of embarrassing my right honourable and learned friend, are perhaps even more distinguished in the law than he is.
Angela Eagle.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I have been a member of this House for 27 years, and I never thought I would be present to watch the benches opposite erupt in applause when a Prime Minister who has had his political strategy torn to shreds by losing 11-0 in the Supreme Court of the land and being found, in the words of the judgment, it is impossible for us to conclude on the evidence which was put before us that there was any reason, let alone a good reason, to advise Her Majesty to prorogue Parliament for 5 weeks. It follows that that decision was unlawful. Why, Mr. Speaker, do we now find this Prime Minister leading a Conservative Party that feel that it's appropriate to applaud that?
Mr. Speaker, if I may say so, I think the commentary of the involuntary commentary of the benches in this House was more directed at the leader of the opposition than at anything I had to say. But my strong view is that the opinion of the Supreme Court has, of course, to be respected and fulfilled, and that is why I'm pleased to say we're all here today to listen to the right honourable lady.
Sir John Hay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In 1801, Horatio Nelson, perhaps our nation's greatest hero, chose not to see advice to retreat. In that spirit, will the Prime Minister turn a blind eye to the antics of the Liberal establishment and turn a deaf ear to the shrill bleats of those who seek to foil Brexit and frustrate the will of the people? For he must know that the loud and clear cry of the working people of this country is as straightforward as this: back Brexit and back Boris.
I thank my right honourable friend. I will not only try to imitate Horatio Nelson, I will lash myself to the mast, figuratively speaking, like Odysseus and stop my ears to the siren cries of those opposite who would try to frustrate the will of the people and block Brexit. That's what they want to do. We're not going to let them do it, Mr. Speaker.
Liz Savile-Roberts.
Could I congratulate the resilience and resoluteness of intent of the opposition leaders in the face of the Prime Minister's incontinent goading? This government will abide by legislation to extend Article 50 unless this House decides otherwise. Mr. Speaker, the Supreme Court decided that the Prime Minister did not prorogue this place in order to deliver a Queen's speech, but to stymie parliamentary debate. I would not presume to impugn the honour of the Prime Minister, but the Supreme Court clearly does not believe his motives to be, how can I put this, legitimate. Now, in 2004, the Prime Minister, who was then the Member of Parliament for Henley...
Sit down. Sit down. I'm going to try to be helpful to the honourable gentleman, who's a most dedicated and assiduous member of 2 years' standing. We don't have points of order in the middle of exchanges. I will try to provide a tutorial to the honourable gentleman on another occasion, but the honourable lady will not be prevented from asking her question. She's asking the question, she will ask it, and it will be heard. And the honourable gentleman will sit quietly and listen. Liz Savile-Roberts.
You'll find this relevant, because in 2004, the Prime Minister, MP for Henley at the time, wrote a column in the Telegraph in which he argued that Tony Blair should be impeached as he, and I quote, treated Parliament and the public with contempt over the matter of disclosure of motives and legal advice relating to the Iraq War. The Right Honourable Member even edited a copy of The Spectator, which called for Blair to be impeached for lying. He also signed an impeachment motion.
Order. I have protected the honourable lady, and rightly so, from inappropriate attempts to cut her off. But she must ask a question, and I hope that she's I'm hoping very much that she's approaching the end of her question. She really does need to do so. Liz Savile-Roberts.
And to close that off, the Prime Minister at the time also signed a motion for impeachment of Tony Blair, which was brought forward by the now Leader of Plaid Cymru, Adam Price. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is surely not a man who would like to look inconsistent. So I ask him, does he still believe it to be right and proper to seek to impeach a Prime Minister who has been judged to mislead the public?
Already explained once. Let me say to the honourable gentleman again, in terms that brook of no misunderstanding, now is not the time for points of order. That time will come, and if the honourable gentleman's still interested, he'll be heard. But he really does need to learn the procedures in these matters. The Prime Minister.
I thank the Right Honourable Lady very much for her question. I'm glad that she's such an assiduous reader of my column, Mr. Speaker, but I must correct her on two important points, or make clear two important things. The first is that the Supreme Court did not impugn the motives of the government at all. And the second, I think she should bear in mind, is that Wales voted leave.
And Maine.
Speaker, when it suits politicians, they promise elections and referenda. And indeed, in 2008, the Liberal Democrats promised a referendum on the future in, out, in and out. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that those who shouted the loudest for a referendum are now promising revoke, and that is undemocratic, just as it is undemocratic to be bench blocking and refusing the public the chance to decide to have a government that can be in power, not just in office?
Well, my honourable friend is entirely right, of course, and the absurdity of the Liberal Democrat position is only equalled, and if not surpassed, by the absurdity of the Labour position, because they, after all, are committed to negotiating a new deal with the European Union and then campaigning against it.
Jess Phillips.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know that the Prime Minister wants to appear as a strong man, but the strongest thing he could do that would look the best to this country at the moment would be to act with some humility and contrition. There are many of them, but the difference between the Prime Minister and myself is if the Labour Party had done this, I would be ashamed. I would be sorry that the Labour Party had been found to do this. And I ask the Prime Minister, simply, this looks horrendous to the public, and he thinks he speaks for the people. Let me tell you now, it will look much better if the Prime Minister rises to his feet now and says, I am sorry, I got this wrong. Let's try honesty.
Well, I'm grateful to the honourable lady, and I may say that I think, I do accept the judgment of the Supreme Court, as I've said many times, I think, this afternoon. But I also may say to her, in all candour, I think that the humblest and most responsible thing that we could all do as parliamentarians is show that we respect the judgment of the people and take this country out on October the 31st.
Steve Brine.
Much, Mr. Speaker. Back on the 3rd of September, I asked the Prime Minister, given his view then, that the chances of a deal had increased and that things were moving, as he said to me at the time, what evidence of that progress he could put before the House. Now, I think the Prime Minister is unfairly maligned, because I have sat face to face with him, as have many, and I know he wants a deal. So, in the light of encouraging noises from him and from his ministers in recent days, and as he said in his statement from the EU, could I just ask him again this evening, when he says we are making progress, what that progress looks like? Because I know he needs to bring together a majority in and across this House in order to get it through and to show that to our EU leaders, and I think that he is unfairly maligned, as I say. So, what can he put before the House to give us that encouragement?
I'm really grateful to my honourable friend, and as I said to the House in my opening statement, we've moved a long way off the idea that the withdrawal agreement was the law of the Medes and the Persians, fixed, immutable, graven in tablets of stone. That's absolutely gone. We've moved a long way from the idea that the backstop had to be retained in all circumstances. He will have heard Jean-Claude Juncker himself say that he no longer had any, I think he said, any erotic fixation with the backstop. In concrete terms, the three, and this will perhaps be helpful to the House, the three areas in which progress is being made are the concept of the alternative arrangements, which I know has been discussed many times in this House, and many right honourable members have gone over it many times, but it is a fruitful area of discussion. The second idea, which is also extremely fruitful, is the concept of doing everything we can to maintain the unity of the island of Ireland for sanitary and phytosanitary purposes. And as I'm sure my honourable friend who has studied these matters closely will acknowledge, that is a big concession by the UK government and a big advance, and it needs to be handled with care. We need to get the balance right, but we think that progress can be made in that area. And the third concept, and I mentioned it already in my opening remarks, Mr. Speaker, is the idea of consent. And I think consent holds the key, because the problem with the backstop, as honourable members opposite will recall, because I heard some very good speeches against it from the benches opposite, the problem with the backstop is it doesn't repose the locus of authority here in the UK, and we need to remedy that, and I'm sure he understands that point too.
Gloria de Piera.